Okay, so today we're going to kind of jump into a deep dive of a story that's pretty old, but still feels relevant today.
Uh,
Infertility, societal pressures, and faith, all wrapped up in one chapter of the Bible.
wow.
The story of Hannah from 1 Samuel 1.
It's incredible how these stories from thousands of years ago can still resonate so strongly today.
Yeah, so we meet Hannah, right? And she's in this polygamous marriage, and she's dealing with some pretty heavy stuff right off the bat.
Yeah.
She can't have children. And on top of that, she's facing judgment from Peninnah, who's the other wife and who does have kids.
It's so important to understand like the cultural context here.
Huh.
Back then, having children was seen as like this huge sign of God's blessing.
Right, simply sums.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Sons, especially sons, it was tied to a woman's worth. So Hannah's pain would have been just immense.
Yeah, emotionally, social, like you can't even imagine.
It's just heartbreaking to think about the pressure she must have been under.
And the text doesn't sugarcoat it either.
No?
It talks about how Peninnah is constantly provoking her and mocking her for being barren.
It's tough.
It's a tough situation. It really is.
Really highlights how even within families, jealousy and competition can run so deep.
Right.
And it's often tied to these societal expectations.
And then on top of that, you have the fact that Hannah's response is not to lash out.
No.
She doesn't give in to despair either.
He turns to her faith.
And that's where it gets really powerful.
Mm.
So picture this. Hannah is just overwhelmed with grief, and she goes to the tabernacle,
Mm-hmm.
the place of worship.
Mm-hmm.
But she doesn't rant, she doesn't rave, she just pours her heart out to God in this silent, tearful prayer.
It's powerful, that silence, and
Yeah.
it speaks volumes about her relationship with the God. It's
Yeah.
like words aren't even needed.
It's interesting. It makes you think about how we approach prayer today.
Yeah.
Like, do we allow ourselves to be that vulnerable? Do we bring that same raw honesty to our prayers?
It's a good question.
But there's a little twist here. Eli the priest, he sees Hannah in distress. He sees her praying silently, tearfully, and he kind of jumps to conclusions.
Oh, no. What does he think?
He thinks she's drunk.
Oh, wow.
Could you believe it?
I mean, you can kind of laugh about it.
It's almost comical.
But it also says something about Eli's leadership and assumptions about women at the time.
It really does.
Definitely adds another layer to the story.
It does.
But thankfully, Hannah, she handles it all with grace.
Yeah.
And she explains herself to Eli, and he listens, and he offers a blessing.
It's a reminder that sometimes just clear communication is key,
It is.
even when it feels awkward or embarrassing.
Absolutely.
But here's the incredible part. After this encounter, Hannah leaves, and she conceives. She gives birth to a son, Samuel,
What a beautiful name.
whose name means asked of God.
That's amazing. A real testament to the power of prayer and God's faithfulness.
But it also sets the stage for another twist. Remember, Hannah made a vow.
Oh, right.
She said if God blessed her with a son, she would dedicate him back to his service.
And now, little Samuel, he's here, healthy, full of promise, but Hannah has to make this incredibly difficult choice.
To fulfill her vow, she has to leave Samuel at the temple to be raised by Eli.
It must have just torn her apart.
To long for a child to face all that ridicule and judgment, then experience this miracle and then have to let him go.
Really speaks volumes about her faith, her sacrifice, her trust in God's plan.
And it resonates with parents even today.
It does.
The choices we make for our children's well-being, the sacrifices we make, even letting go.
Absolutely. These are universal experiences.
So we've seen this incredible strength, raw emotion, and ultimately the triumph of faith.
We have.
But what can we take away from Hannah's experience?
Yeah, what are the lasting lessons for us today?
Let's explore that.
Okay, great. You know what strikes me is just how powerful her prayer was?
Yeah.
She didn't need like a stage or fancy words. She didn't even speak out loud.
Right.
But those raw, heartfelt pleas, those silent tears, they reached God.
It really makes you think about how we pray today.
It does.
It's not about performance. It's about connection.
It is.
Like you said, whispered or cried out,
Yeah.
it doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter. It's about that connection, that vulnerability.
And Hannah shows us that sometimes the most powerful prayers are the ones whispered in the silence of our own hearts.
Absolutely. And then there's this incredible resilience she shows,
Yeah.
faced with infertility, societal pressure, even misjudgment from Eli. She could have just given up.
Easily.
But no, she chose faith over despair.
She kept believing,
She kept praying.
and ultimately she got her miracle.
It's inspiring. It reminds us that even when things are really tough, when we feel alone, there's always hope.
And that holding on to faith can make all the difference.
And then there's this idea of honoring commitments even when they're really hard.
Oh, yeah?
Hannah made that vow to God and she kept it, even though it meant letting go of Samuel.
It shows real integrity.
And the strength of her word.
Makes you think about the commitments we make in our own lives.
He does.
To our families,
Yeah.
our values, our goals.
They really shape who we are.
And sometimes keeping those commitments requires real sacrifice.
Like Hannah shows us.
But it's worth it.
It is. And we can't forget how Hannah handled that misunderstanding with Eli.
Oh, yeah. She could have gotten angry.
She could have.
But she chose clarity and grace.
She did. She explained herself calmly, and it led to understanding and a blessing.
It's a lesson for all of us, I think.
Especially now.
Yeah, where misunderstandings and judgments happen all the time.
Choosing to communicate clearly and respond with grace can totally change things.
It can build bridges instead of walls.
Exactly. And, if you think about it in the bigger picture, it's about using our blessings to serve others.
Right.
Hannah dedicated Samuel to God's service.
Which was a personal sacrifice.
It was, but it ultimately benefited everyone.
It's a beautiful example of how our sacrifices can ripple outwards.
And make a real impact on the world.
It makes you think, how can we use our own gifts and talents to serve something bigger than ourselves?
That's a good question.
Hannah's story is so rich and complex. It offers wisdom that goes beyond time and culture.
It does.
We see strength, we see raw emotion.
And ultimately, faith and sacrifice.
It reminds us there's always hope.
Even in the darkest moments.
And that even in our struggles, we can find universal truths.
That connect us to something bigger.
So as you go about your day, think about the questions we ask.
Yeah, what sacrifices have you made for something you really believed in?
How has your faith been tested?
And what did you learn from it?
Because sometimes the most profound insights come not from the answers,
but from the questions we ask. It's pretty amazing how her story can still speak to us, after all this time.
It really shows you how powerful these ancient stories can be.
Hannah's journey, it had its ups and downs.
Yeah, for sure.
Challenges, triumphs, but it's like a reflection of what we all go through.
It really is, and it gives us so much to think about.
It is.
The power of prayer resilience, honoring those commitments, and how our choices affect others. It's all there.
For me, it goes beyond just infertility or the societal pressures.
It digs into these deeper questions of faith and sacrifice.
What does it mean to live a life of purpose?
Exactly.
Yeah. It's a story that reminds us that even when we're struggling, there's still strength and hope and connection to be found.
And even in our own personal stuff.
Yeah.
There are these universal truths
that connect us to something bigger.
So as you go about your day, keep those questions in mind.
Yeah, the ones we talked about.
What sacrifices have you made for something you really believed in?
How has your faith been tested?
And what did you learn?
Sometimes the deepest insights come not from the answers we find, but from the questions we ask.
That's so true.
Well, that's all the time we have for our deep dive today.
This was great.
It was. It really was. Thanks for joining me.
Thanks for having me.